Okay, so in today's video I'm going to show you how to set up Active Directory. We're going to be using a Windows Server 2016 image. I'm doing this in a virtual environment, so this may vary depending on your setup that you're currently using or your environment. So Active Directory is responsible for providing group policy, users and machine management across the network. If you've ever logged into a PC and been able to go to another PC elsewhere in the business and sign on with the same username and credentials, then you have used Active Directory. Every single business or large business will use some form of Active Directory, whether it's a Windows environment or a Linux environment. That they're used commonly across the world. Setup may vary. This is going to be a general video of how to set it up. So like I said, we are running in a virtual environment, which means I've got a virtual network set up. It's a private network. It doesn't have any internet access, and vice versa. It doesn't have no IP addressing on it, as we're going to be setting that up. So you need to bear that in mind when you are working with your network, because you might already have a network that already has a DHCP server on there. We won't be covering that in this video, but basically if you are going to be using this server to hand out your IP address ranges, then you do need to disable that DHCP server, wherever that might be on your network. Okay, so basically let's go ahead and let's set up IP addressing. Let's set up some static IPs for these two machines. So I've got this machine here, which is Windows Server 2016 box, and I've also got a Windows 10 image here. Vanilla image. These are brand new. The only thing that's been installed on them is the VMware tools. That's it. So let's go into the NIC. Let's go Network and Sharing Center, Ethernet, and let's set up a private network. So this is going to be a static IP address of the server. Now you will need to remember this, so try and do it something that you will remember. So just for this sake, I'm going to do 172.28. Let's do 100. Let's do .10. I'm going to do a Class C range, which is 255.255.255.0. Subnet mask can be confusing if you're not very good with networks. There is many tools online that you can calculate subnet masks in ranges. If you are struggling, I suggest you do some research before you set up your network. Default gateway, I'm going to be setting this as blank, but this is going to be the default gateway on your network. This will normally be your router or the switch you're using. But as I mentioned before, this is just a private network with these two machines on, so we don't need to use that. If you do need to get your default gateway, you can open up a command prompt in ipconfig/all, and under default gateway, see mine's blank, so I've not got one. That'll be your default gateway there. You just need to enter that in there. Your default gateway does need to be on the same range as your current network, otherwise you'll have to do some routing, which is some advanced networking work involved in that. We're not going to be covering that either. Just make sure that your default gateway for today's purposes is on the same network as you're going to be setting it to. We don't have a default gateway, like I said, so we're going to skip that. Preferred DNS server, you're going to add 127.0.0.1. If you don't know what that is the local loopback address of this server. If you were to go into command prompt and ping that 127.0.0.1, as you can see, it does respond because that is this machine basically. And the same if you do ping localhost, you'll get the IPv6 address come back. We are going to be disabling that as we're not using IPv6, but basically you would have got this address come back. So okay, that's set. Let's press OK. If you are setting up another domain controller in parallel with this, you would enter its IP address here. You keep this one as yours, as you want the primary one to be the server which you're on. The secondary one would be the other server, so you add that address in there. Press OK. And like I said, let's disable IPv6 for this tutorial. We're not going to be using IPv6. OK, and let's open up Disk Manager. So the reason we're going into Disk Manager is because we actually have a separate disk in here. This is going to be for the Active Directory logs. It doesn't have to be big, it's only 10 gig. You could probably get away with a gig. But yeah, it's best practice to keep your logs away from the C drive in case you do have any sort of disaster or failure happen on your domain controller, you can always recover the logs from a separate disk. You're not going to lose everything altogether. Best practice, not always necessary if you're using multiple domain controllers, but yeah, definitely something which you should consider. So let's go ahead and let's online this disk. Let's initialize it. This one, GPT, that's fine. Okay, new simple volume, click next, next. E, that's fine. And we'll just AD-logs. And then you should get that pop up in a minute. So that's set up. Okay, there you go. You see you've got AD logs there. Cool. So let's go ahead and open Server Manager. And the second thing we're going to do, so the third thing, sorry, is we're going to set the computer name. This is going to be the name of the domain controller. We're not joining the domain yet because we've not got it set up. So, for instance, mine is called test IP DC01. Click OK. Click OK, and then it's going to ask you to restart. I'm going to click restart later because I'm going to configure some other stuff. So the next thing we want to configure is remote desktop. I'm on a virtual machine, so this doesn't really matter for me, but you want to basically enable that. Click OK, untick that. If you leave this one ticked, basically it's network level authentication. Basically, you'll have issues with Cred SSP and connecting to machines which are on different versions of Windows. I'm just going to stay clear of that and untick that option. OK. And everything else looks fine. Okay, once we've got these set up, let's go ahead and reboot. We'll let that reboot, and we'll be back once that has rebooted. Okay, so we've logged back into the server, and now we're ready to install Active Directory. So up here, let's click Manage, Add Roles and Features. Get this box here. Click Next. Next again, role-based installation. Select your machine there. You see now it's got your new machine name there. Select Next. Active Directory Domain Services. That's Features. Make sure you click Active Directory Domain Services. If you click Certificate Services, you're not going to get the same options. I've done that many of times because it's the first option. You actually do need Domain Services. And while we're on here, let's go ahead and install DHCP server. Excuse me. DNS server will automatically be installed with Active Directory as well. Next, next, and then install. And then we'll be back once that has installed. Okay, there we go. So that's installed. Let's go ahead and select Close to Rat. Okay. So in previous versions of Windows Server, such as 2008 R2, I believe this changed. You'd normally go ahead and you run dcpromo.exe. Now in Windows Server 2016 or from 2012, I believe you don't need to do that. If you just select this up here, you can click Promote this server to domain controller. Okay, so we're going to be adding a new forest. You want to call this whatever domain name you're going to be specifying. So this is going to be the full name. I'm going to be using test.suttons.lock, as this is obviously the lab. Actually, so what we'll do lab.suttons.lock. Okay, I don't recommend you using any sort of external external domain name for this, as it may cause some issues when you're browsing the web, as it's going to try and look up them addresses locally, rather than going out on the web to look at them. Click Next. Okay, your forest functionality level. This is quite important. If you've got machines that are not on the same base OS as your server, for example, Windows Server 2016 would obviously be Windows 10, Windows 2008 R2 being Windows 7. You're going to have to research and just make sure that you're running at the same forest functional level, otherwise certain policies and devices may have issues joining the domain. But I'm keeping mine on Windows Server 2016 as all my devices are Windows 10. that's fine. Okay, so in there you want to enter a restore mode password. So if you ever do need to restore Active Directory or perform any administrative roles, such as deleting OUs that are protected, you're going to have to enter this password. So make sure you remember what this password is. Next. Click next. The NetBIOS name is going to be the actual name of the domain once it shows up on the PC on your front login page. Okay, I'm going to call mine lab because it's obviously lab.suttons.lock, but you could call this Suttons or whatever your name of choice is. You don't need the full name in here. You could put the full name if you like, but I'm just going to use abbreviated names. Click next. Okay, so your database and your log files and your sysfile folder. Okay, so you also want to set your database folder here. I'm using drive E, so I'm going to just set these to E. They don't have to be called this, I'm just keeping them the defaults, but you can call these a better naming convention that makes more sense to you. That's absolutely fine, so let's select next. Okay, so this is everything we've got so far. When we click next, it's going to run a prerequisite check. Make sure that everything is okay with the server. If there's any warnings or errors, they'll present us here. So let's we'll come back once that's done. Okay, so everything's passed, as you can see. A couple of warnings: Windows NT, DNS. Obviously we're not running DNS yet. Prerequisite check completed. As long as you have this at the bottom, all prerequisite checks passed successfully. Click install to begin. Should be okay to go. So let's press install. Okay, so as you can see, Active Directory has been installed. Let's select close and close on here. It's actually it will log us out, and you're gonna have to log back in. In fact, it looks like it's going to restart. So this is going to restart, and we'll be back once it has restarted. Okay, so you might have noticed that took some time to reboot. You might have noticed some of the different messages as well. But when you log in, look, you just see you've got lab/administrator now. And then log in. Okay, so now we're logged in, Server Manager is loaded. Let's go ahead and let's configure DHCP. Select here, let's complete DHCP configuration. Let's click next. Username lab administrator, that's fine. Okay, so if you select tools and let's go DHCP. And in here is where we're going to be setting our IP addressing. So let's expand this down. IPv4. Let's click new scope, click next, name, let's just call this lab scope. And this is where you're going to put your start IP address. So this needs to be the same range as your server. So let's do 172.28.100. And let's start it from 25, as obviously we need a couple of addresses. It's always best practice to start it from a couple of addresses above number one, as these addresses normally are reserved for servers. We're using .10 on this server, so I'm going to start from 25. That gives us, up to 25 addresses. End IP address is 172.28.100.254. We'll do 255 actually, but normally your default gateway will be 254, but just make sure you set that under that. Subnet mask 255.255.255.0. Click next. Then address is not valid for this range. Subnet broadcast address 254. Okay, make sure enter 254 in there. Okay, so on this page, obviously let's ignore this, but you can add in any exclusions to IP addresses. We don't need any here, but if you add other servers, you can exclude them as well. This is your lease. I'm going to leave its default 8 days. Yes, configure these options now. IP address of the router used by clients. We don't have a router, but that's basically your gateway address in there. Parent domain is lab.suttons.lock. That should be your full domain name. And there's your server. Just double check. I normally remove this. I normally put in the server name, so sut-test-ipdc01 resolve. It should resolve to that same address. Just add that and make sure that that is in there. If you've got multiple NICs, you might get multiple addresses in here. Just make sure you select the NIC which has the correct address on it. Next, you can add in your server address here again. So sut-test-ipdc01 is completely optional. This is more for older devices. Resolve, add, next. Activate the scope now, next, finish, and there you go. You'll see that your scope address pool will be in here now. Okay, let's make sure that that is authorized. It is. All tasks, let's go restart. Okay, that's your DHCP done. What we're going to do is we're going to set up a test DNS record in DNS. Make sure DNS is working. Double click forward reverse lookups. Forward lookup zones. Labsuttons.lock. All tasks. Let's go new host a record. Let's just do this as DNS test, and let's set this to Google. So actually, tell you what, we'll set this to the server address of the domain controller. Post. Okay. So what we can do is when we log onto the computer, the Windows 10 machine, we can ping DNS test, and we should get the server IP back if the DNS is working fine, which is fine. So that's your DNS setup as well. That directory will have set that up. So let's hop over to the guest OS. Okay, so we're on the guest machine now, and everything should be set up. So what you might need to do is give the machine a restart, but I'm going to give it a go through command prompt. Type ipconfig/release, which will release the IP address configuration. ipconfig renew. Basically, it's going to send the request to the DHCP server to get a release from the DHCP server, which in this case is our domain controller. Okay, as you can see, look, it's picked up an address 172.28.100.25, which is the first address in that range we set. Perfect. Okay, and if we do ipconfig/all, make sure it's picked up the DNS servers. It has, and it's also picked up the Win server here. So as you can see, both your DNS servers are in there as well. Okay, so let's go ahead and join this. Let's go ahead and join this machine to the domain. Let's go ahead and let's open File Explorer. Right click this PC, go to Properties, scroll down on here, and you can go Advanced System Settings. In here you can click Computer Name. When you click Change on here, you can also change the PC name. So I'm going to go ahead and change the PC name. I'm going to call it sut-test-os1, and domain. You want to enter your domain, so you can either enter, for example, ours was lab as the friendly name, or you can enter the full name. So I'm going to put lab.suttons.lock. And in here you need to enter your credentials from your administrator account from the other server. So let's go administrator, and then the password in there. Welcome to the lab.suttons.lock domain. Click OK, close, and then let's restart now. If you actually get an error message when looking up the domain saying it cannot be contacted, then it normally is the subject of bad DNS. So you just want to make sure that your DNS service is running on your domain controller, and also make sure your DNS records are right in your adapter and they have picked up correctly. That is normally 90% of the issues with the resolution is in this machine not actually being able to talk to the Active Directory server. Okay, so we're back on. As you can see, now we have an option for other user. We can type in lab backslash. Basically, if you type the administrator in here, it's going to default to the local machine's administrator account. So type lab backslash administrator. You can also type your full name, so lab.suttons lab.lock, and then type your password in there, and that will work as well. But lab is just the friendly name we set on the config. As you can see, it's authenticated now, and it is now logging in. So we'll be back once that has logged in. Okay, so now we've logged in. You can see we've successfully logged into the domain. Okay, one thing I want to do is I just want to test the DNS record we created. So if you just go ping DNS test, as you can see, it returns absolutely fine. Let's also make sure that it returns the Active Directory server. So let's go test BDC over. As you can see, it returns absolutely fine. So that's your basic configuration for Active Directory, DNS and DHCP. As you can see, we've got a fully working environment here where you can log in. Let's go ahead and create another user before we wrap this up. So let's go back over to the server. Let's go Tools, let's go Active Directory Users and Computers. Okay, let's double click here. Let's right click and we can go New Tasks. Actually, let's go into the users here. And let's go ahead, let's click New User. Let's call this Test. Let's name Test. Password. Next. And next again. Okay, so let's go ahead and let's log out of this other machine. Sign out. Okay, let's select the user, enter test, and then the password you just set. It says user password must be changed before signing in, so that's the option we left ticked on the profile. So let's just change that. Change your password, password been changed. As you can see, test. Okay, as you can see, we're logged in now with the user test. Test. So there's your basic ins and outs of how to set up an Active Directory domain controller with DNS and DHCP to do your networking. Let's double check on networking as well. Seeing the IP config, as you can see, look, we've still got that address there. So any other device that you connect to this network will automatically get issued that an IP address from the range we set. So that's the basic ins and outs of Active Directory, DHCP and DNS. Any questions, make sure to leave them down below and we'll get them answered as soon as possible.